Hi, welcome to the Countdown to New Conditions of Participation, Part 3 of 4. As you know, we've had several webinars so far. We are on our third, which is the December 20th week. We will have one more webinar scheduled for January the 10th. New conditions of participation will begin on January the 13th, 2018, so we're ramping up for that big day. All the resources that you'll find in this presentation, as well as previous presentations, can be found within the weekly updates, leader notes, and on the intranet tab. If you go to the intranet, go to Clinical Excellence, and then the tab named New COPs 2018, all of the resources will be found there, as well as recorded versions of the webinars. If you'd like to view an event calendar, it's also posted on the intranet in this same place. Let's go ahead and get started. So part 3 of 4, the topics that we'll be discussing today are home health aide, new hire competency, patient strengths, goals, preferences, and measurable outcomes, cognitive and psychosocial assessment and interventions, and an overview. So starting with our first topic, home health aide, new hire competency. There is an additional requirement now for home health aides under the home health business line. When a home health aide comes into our organization as hired in, we have to add additional competencies to their checklist. For any existing aides, their checklists will need to be updated showing competency for these areas. So under standard or condition 484.80, appropriate and safe techniques in performing personal hygiene and grooming tasks. Previously, the regulations said that home health aides needed to be competencies in a bed bath, and then the agency or the home health aide had a choice of a sponge, tub, or shower bath, so one of the three, and then hair shampooing in the sink, tub, or the bed, choosing one of those three. So the new requirements are stating that we have to competency in every one of the areas. So not only will we competency in bed bath, but we'll be competency on a sponge bath, a tub bath, and a shower bath. So all 4 types of bathing, if that home health aide is going to perform that task. And then in regards to hair care, it is hair shampooing competency, hair shampooing in the sink, and then in the tub, and then in the bed. So all 3 types of hair shampooing. On Form 200, which we'll look at in just a moment, is the home health aide skills checklist. This has been updated to reflect the need to competency in all these areas. So let's take a look at that. So this is the home health aide skills checklist, and as you see, we've broken up each of those items: bed bath, tub bath, shower bath, sponge bath, and then shampooing hair in the tub, sink, and in the bed. So home health aides, if they're going to be performing these skill or these tasks in the home, they will need to be competencies on each of the tasks. So any home health aides coming into the organization starting on January 13th, you will use this new skills checklist. If you do have a home health aide coming in between now and the 13th, you can also use this new checklist. And then any existing home health aides that you have working in your locations, what you'll need to do is go to their employee records, pull out their skills checklist, and any item that has not been previously competencied, you'll need to competency them. You can either document on the current skills checklist that's in their employee file, or you can fill out a new one and it can become an addendum to the original skills list checklist. So hopefully that is pretty clear. If anybody has any questions, please be sure to reach out to your manager or to Andrea Callahan or Susie Oliver if you have any questions. The new form, again, has been updated and is currently on the intranet under Forms. All right, moving along to patient strengths, goals, and preferences. So what we're going to talk about now falls under the standard 484.55, the overarching comprehensive assessment of the patient. So this is only one part of this particular standard. So what we would like to identify here, and this particular, the functionality that's in home care, home base that's helping us capture this patient's strengths, goals, and preferences is already actually in home care, home base, and staff has been using it. I believe it was with the August or the October release, and it's the added section for patient goals, patient stated goals. So staff have already been using this section, so what we're going to do here is we're going to expand upon the reason for using that section. Home Care Home Base added that section to help support the conditions of participation, so we put that information out when that became available to us, but now we're going to drill down a little bit further into the reasoning behind this section being added and what the roles of our caregivers are and what kind of documentation we expect to see in that area. So what's CMS's intent on identifying patient strengths, goals, and preferences is to allow the patient to identify their own strengths, goals, and care preferences, which will include progress towards achievable goals and the measurable outcomes identified by the agency. And the reason for this is supporting that idea of patient-centered care. They want home health agencies and staff of home health agencies to take a role in empowering the patients to take an active stance in their home health care. By providing and empowering the patients, CMS feels that the patients will progress quicker through the care that's being performed and will have better outcomes. So some of the strengths that we can help pull out of patients or help patients identify in themselves, because as we know with anybody, if you build confidence and you build skill, it's going to create positive outcomes in the end, and that's what CMS wants to do with our patients. So some of the areas that you can help bring out in patients or help patients identify in themselves, some of their strengths. Some of their strengths can be awareness of their disease status, knowledge of their medications, motivation and ability to perform self-care, performing their therapeutic exercise programs, understanding what their diet is and food preparation, identifying their vocational interests or hobbies that can help keep them healthy, and then building of their interpersonal relationships. What's their support look like? Do they have financial stability? So these are all strengths that we can work on and identify in our patients and help them identify them in themselves in order to help move them along into that area where they are meeting and reaching the goals that they set out for themselves. So going on to the next slide, so where do we document? So we just spoke about that just a moment ago. It is in the patient goal section under visit actions. And this patient goal is created at start of care. It also can be redefined at resumption of care, recert. And then with any visit during the course of care, that patient goal can be updated or revised by any of the disciplines. So what's really great about this patient goal section is it actually has a comment section attached to it. So at start of care, if a clinician goes in and performs at start of care, they receive what the patient states their goal is and they enter it into this section. Well, any discipline after that can make a comment towards that patient goal. So if a therapist or a nurse is working with the patient and they have found some really great motivating factor that helps that patient along, whether it's in their learning of disease management or medications or exercise related type information. So if a caregiver finds something that's motivating or they just want to make a comment towards that patient goal, They can do it in this section, and then every clinician thereafter can see that particular information. When entering patient goals, we want to make sure they're patient-specific and they're adapted to the patient based on their specific diagnosis, physician orders, upon their assessment, what their input is, and on specific treatments that are being performed. So goals definitely being patient-specific. In addition, we're going to want a measurable outcome with that goal. So we're going to want to ask the patient, once they state their goal, when would they like to achieve their goal? And then how are we going to measure that? So when we're writing a goal, keep that in mind, because we will want to measure that goal throughout the course of care, and we'll want to document towards how we're meeting that goal. So make sure the goals are measurable. Okay. Moving on to the next topic is patients' psychosocial and cognitive status and hospital risk. So the three areas here: psychosocial status, cognitive status, and hospital risks. So again, these three areas fall under the comprehensive assessment of the patient standard, which is 484.55. And the intent here is to provide a more holistic patient assessment. And these identified assessment items must also now be included on the plan of care, which is going to be new for us. So let's look at the definitions first, and then we'll talk about how we're going to get these items onto the plan of care, what our clinicians, the expectations of assessment and interventions. So the definition of psychosocial: it's the evaluation of the patient's mental health, social status, and functional capacity in the community. And we're going to be looking at issues surrounding both the patient's psychological and social conditions. So we're going to be looking at things like education and marital status, marital history. The assessment should identify what issues exist that might complicate or interfere with the delivery of the services or with the ability of the patient to participate in their own care. Cognitive, so the cognitive definition through CMS is the assessment of the degree of the ability to understand, remember, and participate in developing and implementing the plan of care. And then hospital risk is just that, risk of hospitalization. So let's first look at how we're going to get this information on the plan of care, and then we'll discuss clinician care in the home. So Home Care Home Base has set the system to have certain functionality now where we can identify a particular assessment question, and if we flag a particular assessment question, the answer to that question can then be pulled back into the plan of care. So that's what we've done here. So we've identified one assessment question for psychosocial, two for cognitive, and one for hospital risk. So the one we've identified for psychosocial is a new one. We've added it to the system. It'll be available on January the 13th. The new question is going to ask, what psychosocial issues exist that complicate or interfere with the delivery of services and affect the patient's ability to participate in their own care? So our clinicians will select what psychosocial issues exist, and again, that information is going to flow to the plan of care. Cognitive status. The questions were already available through our OASIS assessment, so we have chosen M1710 OASIS item. When staff answer this item, the answer to the item will then pull to the plan of care. And the second cognitive status question is OASIS item M1740. So the answer to this question when they perform their assessment will then flow to the plan of care. And then the last one, our hospital risk, we chose OASIS item 1033. When staff answer this item, this answer will then pull to the plan of care. So that's kind of the easy part. So we did add one new question because we didn't have a very good choice of psychosocial questions within our assessment. So we did add one new question, and then we chose 3 existing OASIS questions, and then that information will pull to the plan of care automatically. So that part's easy. Let's move into a little bit more of a difficult thing to talk about, but it is what the caregiver is going to do in the home. So how is the caregiver going to, the clinician, how are they going to incorporate an order on the plan of care that addresses psychosocial and cognitive issues, as well as provide interventions and be able to document those interventions appropriately. So if psychosocial or cognitive issues have been identified, we will answer our assessment questions that we just identified in the previous slides. And then what the system is in addition going to do for us, depending on our answers to those three questions, we will actually be able to link problem statements to those questions. So if you answer a particular item a particular way, it's going to identify that yes, there are psychosocial or there's cognitive issues. And if there is, the system is going to prompt the clinician to add a problem statement onto the plan of care. So again, let the system drive us to what we need to do. The problem statement that we've added to the system is need for further clinical interventions or referral to additional care sources, outside entities, or care providers due to psychosocial and cognitive issues. So we can provide clinical interventions. We can refer them to additional care sources, and those are your additional disciplines. We can refer somebody to outside entities or other care providers due to these issues identified. So this is the problem statement that will be added to the plan of care. So let's look a little bit closer at the problem statement and the interventions that will be available. So we do have a process handout here that we can use with staff. At the top of the handout just gives information about the standard and why we need to do what we're doing. Problem statement is listed here for your viewing. The order is going to have the home health agency will make a referral. We need to add, you will find when this is updated in the system, that it will be the home health agency will provide specific interventions or make a referral. So it will have interventions in with this plan of care order as well. But the plan of care order will be edited. The plan of care goal will then flow to the 485. And then the clinician is going to see 3 different interventions that they can choose from and choose whichever one's most appropriate for that particular visit. One intervention is going to give them information on the education that's provided to the patient on what interventions might be needed or referrals might be needed. So it's just taking that step and having a conversation with the patient and explaining what we're seeing and what we can do for them. The second intervention is going to give the place for clinicians to document what type of referral or interventions that they have performed. And then the third intervention can be chosen if there's any specific follow-up with any of the new referral sources. So on down the road on visit 3, 4, 5, and 6, if follow-up needs to be documented with somebody that's also assisting the patient, then it'll give a place for that documentation to occur. The one thing we'll want to make sure that all clinicians understand is the importance of using intervention details when they're working with the intervention and goals section within Home Care Home Base. So when clinicians choose particular interventions that they are going to perform for that visit, or they've performed for that visit, once they select that intervention, they're going to have the option to click on intervention details. Once they click on intervention details, that is what's going to give them the list of all kinds of interventions that they can choose from. Number one, prompting them as to what interventions should be performed for that particular area. And then 2, also assisting with speed and documentation. So helping with efficiency and helping with memory of what to do and how to document it. So intervention details are a really important piece that we want to make sure clinicians are using within point care. Okay, so now going back to the presentation. So that is the psychosocial and cognitive issues identified. and what that pathway looks like. Okay, so now we're to the overview part of the presentation. So what we would like to do now is we developed a new COP checklist. So the checklist I'm going to pull up in just a moment is divided up into the different roles within the office and the field, and identifies all of the areas that we've discussed in the previous two presentations as well as this presentation to kind of tie it up nicely in a bow, to hopefully streamline exactly what each person or each role has a responsibility of overseeing. I'm going to go ahead and pull up that checklist, and we will go down through this. Okay, so starting off from the beginning, and this is taking us from a referral to discharge. So kind of the whole gamut and what everything looks like in sequence. So the first thing we want to do is make sure our offices are prepared. Welcome letter is on the intranet. We spoke about this, I believe, in the last presentation. The welcome letter is interactive. It's located on the company intranet under forms, and it's form number 1760. What the role of the office is they need to access this form, complete it, and insert it into all starter care packets no later than January 13th. You certainly can start now. The two items that need to be added to that is, one, the Director of Operations and the Director of Clinical Services name, as well as the addresses and phone numbers of the 5 community resources that we are now required to give to the patient. So that's ready. Patient complaints and concerns. So what is the office role in this? So a lot of times these patient complaints and concerns come into our office. So what do we do with them? We do have a policy. We've always had a policy. Patient complaints and concerns is policy 33.06, the administrative policy. But what CMS has done within the new COPs is expanded upon what their expectations are and how we handle patient complaints and concerns. So the COPs are very specific in that they expect to see thorough resolution with the patient, and we need to show that within documentation. We have home care home base, which will capture this particular type of occurrence, and it'll create workflow. When the workflow is created, our managers within the office can keep that workflow open until the resolution has occurred. So if there are several contacts or several steps in resolving this complaint or concern, notes can be added ongoing within this particular workflow. Once everything is tied up and it is resolved, then the workflow can be completed. The COPs are very specific in stating that the patient follow-up needs to occur within 5 days. So that's new within the requirements. Not only that we have to resolve, or not only that we have to have patient follow-up within 5 days, but we have to give special emphasis on this particular area within home health. So just know that when survey does come and a surveyor will come into your location, they will be asking for our complaint logs and how our documentation showing the resolve. So this definitely will be a hot topic area in the coming couple years. So you definitely want to address it with your staff. Not only what is a patient complaint and concern, so how do you identify them, how do you document them, and how do you follow up? Then the third area of the office, patient orientation book. The books have been revised. They are ready and should be delivered to your offices already, and we need to add them to your starter care packets no later than January 13th. You can start using them now if you'd like. The last area is clinical record request. So the office does have a part in this. So we will be providing Form 148, the authorization for use of disclosure of protected health information. That hasn't changed. That form hasn't changed. It's available on the forms page. We can provide it to the patient however, or the authorized person however we need to get it to them. They'll hand deliver it, mail it, email it, whatever the best option is. Once the patient or the authorized person completes the form and signs it and hands it back or sends it back to the home health agency, once it's in the home health agency's hands, that's when our clock starts. And the clock is for the amount of time that we have to get them their records. So CMS has a new standard that states that records will be provided upon request within 4 days or the next visit in the home, whichever comes first. So we're on a very tight timeline here once we receive the completed and signed form. If the clinician receives that completed signed form and they're in that patient's home, they could email it back to the office, or they can hand deliver it to the office, whatever is quicker or most convenient, but it has to be same day. As soon as the clinician might receive it, same day it needs to get to the office. Once it gets to the office, it needs to get to the medical records, and that same day the medical records person needs to pull the documents, so it needs to be moved up on the priority list of what they're doing, pull the documents and get them sent to Janet Wallace here at Support Services corporate office. Once Janet receives it, she will be mailing out the documents to the patient overnight delivery. Okay. So hopefully we'll be able to meet the 4 days. Now, what if the patient has a BID visit or a visit the very next day? There may be times that we'll be faced with possibly having to hand deliver the records to the patient. And just remember, if this particular situation comes up, please refer and reach out to management staff and make sure HIPAA standards are followed when having patient documents in your hands. Now, the other thing too that we can kind of work with the timing of when we receive the form. So say that the patient has, or the authorized person has the form completed and signed. They let the agency know that. Well, what if they pick it up on a Monday instead of a Friday afternoon? That can be huge, because if a clinician picks it up on a Friday afternoon, we've just almost lost 2 days because of the weekend. So it would behoove us to kind of work with timing and pick up a signed documented or signed completed form, giving us ample opportunity to get them this information per the standard. Now, certainly if the records are required urgently, then we would need to work out something differently. So if an urgent request is needed, that's different. But if it's not an urgent request, we can possibly work with when this form gets to us signed, giving us the best chance to meet this particular 4-day or next visit in home requirement. Okay, moving on to intake. So what is intake's role? So when a referral comes into the office, there's several things you'll want to work with your intake on to make sure that the patient record is as thorough as possible to meet the needs of the standards and what additional care is going to be provided in the home. First of all, enter all patient contacts. So any patient contact that's found on the referral should be entered, including addresses and phone numbers and emails if they're available. Appropriate care types and patient programs should be entered. If the referral identifies the patient's language, that needs to be entered as a spoken language. If the referral shows that there's a legal representative for this patient, it should throw up a huge red flag for the intake to notify the DCS and have the DCS look at the referral. What we're looking for is a signed copy of the rights and responsibilities in the DC and transfer policy. So if you remember from a previous education session, we talked about if a patient has a legal representative, which, I'm thinking that This does not happen all that often, so this is going to be more on the rare side of things, but it definitely does happen. So if the patient has a legal representative, we cannot perform any hands-on care with this patient or initiate the start of care until the legal representative reviews, has a copy of, and signs rights and responsibilities and DC and transfer policy. Your CTNs at your local hospitals can assist with this. So if the legal representative is in the hospital and possibly may not be available for when that patient goes home, it would be great to get this signed copy of the consent while that legal representative is with the patient in the hospital. And then that consent then can be sent with the referral. This is why the intake should be notifying DCS to help go through the referral. If it's seen that the consent is not in the referral, special arrangements are going to need to be made with that legal representative to make sure they're in the home when the clinician arrives, so the consent then can be signed by them. If by chance the clinician gets in the home and the legal representative is not present, the clinician will not be able to move forward with the start of care. So that clinician then will be armed with, okay, so what do I do at this point? The clinician's going to have some creative thinking. So it's going to be up to our clinician at this point to help facilitate this. So what some of the examples here could be is that if the legal representative can be notified by phone, that would be awesome. So legal representative, clinician gets them on the phone, the clinician explains rights and responsibilities, explains the discharge transfer policy, explains that they need their signature. If that legal representative is someplace where a document can be faxed to them, the clinician can call the office and ask for a fax copy of the rights and responsibilities, discharge transfer policy, and the consent to be sent to the patient, or the legal representative by email. Legal representative can sign the consent, send it right back to the office, and fax it back to the office or scan it in, and then the office can then alert the clinician to say, hey, we've received it, you can move forward with the start of care. So that maybe is one scenario. Another scenario is that the visit needs to be rescheduled. And if that's the case, the clinician in the home needs to find out when that legal representative will be available, schedule time for that start of care to occur, and then they need to send back their visit, which we'll talk about down further a little bit, but the clinician will then send back their visit with that information on it, and we'll talk about the specifics there. One last thing, if the document for rights and responsibilities, DC and transfer policy, and the consent, if that document's ever needed to either print out at the hospital or send electronically to somebody, we have created one PDF document. It's housed on the intranet in 3 different locations. It's on the forms page with its own button. It's in the new COP tab within Clinical Excellence, and it's attached to the Bill of Rights and Responsibilities policy. So 3 different places you can find it. So that's intake, big roles with intake. Okay, so let's go into what the clinician is going to do, what areas that are the clinician going to handle in the home when they go. First thing they're going to do is look at the patient orientation handbook. It has been updated to support new COPs, and we're just going to go down through the highlighted areas that have been changed. The first is the index. There is a language assistance services page. If a clinician gets in the home and a patient is non-English speaking, they can use this page in order to show it to the non-English speaking person, and it will give them information about us being able to provide an interpreter. Now, if this is the case and we do have to provide an interpreter, we actually have until the second visit to accomplish all the things we need to accomplish as far as their rights and informing them of what we need to inform them. So it gives us a little bit of time to work with getting that interpreter in the home. Page 3, plan of care development. This supports the patient-centered care, and it gives information on the patient has the right to know about their plan of care, to be involved in their plan of care, and to receive changes in their plan of care. Page 4 is your discharge and transfer policy. Page 7 goes over your complaint and concern process, and it does state in there that the DO and DCS names that we are now required to give them will be made available on the welcome letter. Page 11 and 14 are your rights and responsibilities for the patient. Page 37 through 44 is emergency preparedness. Now, we spoke about this in a previous education session. One of the new areas here is that CMS has taken a all hazards approach, is what they call it. And what that means is that every region has different hazards that they may experience. So we need to educate towards the hazards, environmental hazards, that would be identified for that particular region. The last thing in the book that's new is that they have, I'm going to back up just one moment. Page 45 is the Patient Emergency Preparedness Plan. So this is a place that you can look at and work with the patient to help develop the emergency plan. It will give you very good ideas of what to talk to about the patient, what their plan is going to look like, where they're going to go in case of an emergency. So definitely use the Patient Emergency Preparedness Plan. In the COPs, it does say that the patient is going to receive a written plan, and this is where that can be captured. Now, patient consent. The only thing new here is that they added that OASIS data collection is going to occur. So just so the patients know that. So that's the changes with the handbook. So let's move on. Start of care in the home. What are we going to do with the consent? Of course, no change here that patient will sign it prior to any hands-on care. If they have a legal representative, this is what we just talked about just a few minutes ago, so I won't go over all of that information, but again, must have signature on the consent if they have a legal representative prior to any hands-on care. If it's not in with the referral or has not been captured prior to the start of care or during the start of care, so say the legal representative is not present, we haven't gotten it yet, and we need to reschedule the start of care visit, the clinician will choose non-admit because they've already have opened up the visit in point care. So the only options they really have to do is non-admit. So they're going to non-admit, and they're going to choose the reason, reschedule start of care due to no legal representative present. Once they do that, it's going to give them a box that they can enter a note. So the clinician's responsibility at that point is to figure out when this legal representative is going to be present so a start of care can be rescheduled, and they're going to enter that information in the note. DCS is going to receive this workflow, and then the visit will be rescheduled, or if additional collaboration needs to occur, the DCS can also help facilitate that. And the DCS is going to know what needs to be done because of the note that the clinician is going to put in for the non-admit. All right, the welcome letter. So the clinician will want to show the welcome letter to the patient. It has the DO/DCS name as well as agency contact information for community resources that we're now required to give them. When the clinician gets to the demographic section of their assessment and endpoint care, a couple items here. Patient contacts. They're going to want to enter any patient edit any patient contacts that's entered by intake. They're going to designate PHI approved. They're going to enter addresses and phone numbers and emails if available. The last thing they're going to do is with the identifying contacts is identifying if they have one of the three that we spoke about in a previous education session. That was primary caregiver, legal representative, patient selected representative. These assessment questions, there's 3 assessment questions that will help prompt this as well. Now, a particular contact may not be considered a primary caregiver, legal representative, or patient selected representative, and that's fine. Some patients may not have any one of these 3. They just may have an emergency contact that lives out of state, and it might be an aunt or an uncle or a sister or a brother or a daughter. But they're not a primary caregiver. They're not providing hands-on care. They're not a legal representative or a patient-selected representative. So it's okay not to choose these. But if they have one, we need to choose them because throughout the course of care, we're going to need to provide them with particular pieces of information. If the clinician forgets to enter these three within the demographic section, they will remember when they get to the assessment questions. And the assessment questions will walk them through what each one of these mean and how to identify them in the patient. So hopefully the assessment questions will be really great. The additional thing on one of the assessment questions is if the answer is yes, that the patient has a patient-selected representative. If they do, if you remember from the previous education, if they do have a patient-selected representative, the patient can request to have rights and responsibilities in the discharge and transfer policy sent to the patient-selected representative if they aren't present in the home during the start of care. It doesn't have to be sent. It's upon the patient request, so it's not a requirement that we automatically do this. But if the patient feels that their particular patient-selected representative, they want them to have this information in writing, we can send it to them that way. Now, if the selected representative comes to the patient's home, well, they can view it in the orientation book if they need to. But again, if we need to send it electronically or mail it, the assessment question will walk the clinician through that determination, and then if the patient requests it, then a coordination note will be able to be accessed, and the coordination note then will kick off workflow to medical records, and medical records can then send that information out. Now, the very last thing under patient contacts. So it's important to know that if the patient has if the patient has a primary caregiver, so they have somebody providing hands-on care in the home, that particular information needs to be put into the system as to when that caregiver is available. And the intent of this is for CMS, or CMS says the intent for this is that they want home health agencies and caregivers or clinicians to know when primary caregivers are in that patient's home, so that if education and training needs to occur, that the visits that are being performed are being done efficiently and effectively, and that caregivers understand how to take care of the patient as well as the patient. All right, moving on. Advanced directives. Clinicians need to make sure advanced directives are entered appropriately because now they're going to pull to the plan of care. We're going to need to make sure emergency preparedness plan is discussed and documented. We already have a place for that. It's under the evacuation location, activity status, disaster status. But what we want to make sure is that the organization is kind of standard in their approach as to what information we're putting into this section. And what we have chosen is, where will that patient go? What location will they go to if an environmental emergency occurred and they had to leave their home? Okay, so that's what information will be needed in this section. The reason why is that if an environmental emergency occurred and we needed to pull this emergency preparedness report out of the system so we could track our patients, we're going to know where they go to. We're going to be able to look on this report and tell exactly, oh, they're with their daughter, which is their contact, and we can call their daughter then to help provide care if we need to. So we need to know where they're evacuating to. And then the last thing under demographics is the primary spoken language. Now, this is something we haven't done yet in home care, home base, so it's going to be new for the staff. So please tell them under demographics, towards the bottom of the list is personal. It says personal, that's the section. When they click on personal, they're going to see edit. They're going to click edit. They're going to have the option to edit primary spoken language and religion if they need to, but definitely primary spoken language. The COPs are very, very, very solid in their expectation of patients and caregivers receiving information in their spoken language. So upon a survey again, if it's going to be a question to a surveyor if we don't have what that patient's spoken language is documented. So we definitely want to document it. Now continue on with the start of care. We have the physical assessment. So the new thing added here is the documentation questions for psychosocial and cognitive. And knowing that home care home base is going to pull information from these assessment questions into the plan of care. Patient stated goals, identifying patient strengths, goals, and preferences. This section's already there. We just need to make sure staff understand the expectations of entering these type of goals, revising as needed, and entering comments to help with the collaboration amongst clinicians. We have new pathways that have been added to support the new COPs. The first one we talked about in a previous session, and that was the need to add additional physicians, need to add who the patient is going to be discharged to, and the fact that we need to inform all physicians, patients, and caregivers of any discharge plans, revisions to the plan of care, and changes impacting discharge plans. So these are the items that need to be addressed throughout the course of care and as well beyond the 485. The interventions and the intervention details within this pathway will support everything that needs to occur through the course of care. So please, this particular pathway, need to add it to every patient. Need for further clinical interventions or referral to additional care sources. This is the one we just talked about earlier on this call, so I won't go over that one again. And that one will be prompted by the system when certain answers are answered with the psychosocial and cognitive assessment questions. And then the knowledge of discharge and education planning. This one is already being used, but definitely something that CMS is very strong in, that we provide solid discharge planning with our patients. Lastly, for our clinicians in the field, DC and transfer coordination notes. So if somebody's been discharged, transferred, clinicians need to complete the care summary, transfer, discharge coordination note. Okay, we are coming towards the end of the session, so we have about 3 or 4 more minutes, so just bear with me, we're almost done. MCS and DCS, so their responsibilities are to do the quality review when the information gets back into the system from the start of care, and they're going to want to do their review timely so that the patient instruction report can be sent out to the patient. So if we remember, the patient instruction report is that report that's going to replace the current med list that's being sent out to the patient's home. The med list workflow will no longer exist, and this workflow will replace the med list workflow. So it's called patient instruction report. It has the med list attached, but it gives them kind of all of their plan of care information that we're required to now provide to them in writing. The DCS is also going to work that not admit workflow if there is no legal representative present at the start of care. The notes that have been placed within the non-admit note from the clinician in the field will help drive what actions the DCS will need to take. And then lastly, what are our medical records or our team coordinators? What are their responsibilities? So they're going to be reviewing coordination notes, and they're going to be looking for send rights and responsibilities and discharge and transfer policy coordination notes. If they see one of these, they're going to know that the patient has requested the patient selected representative to be sent a copy of rights and responsibilities transfer policy. And they're going to know that because there's a template within that coordination note that the clinician was prompted to fill out. So then they'll mail or send or email that information out. They're going to mail the patient instruction report that we just spoke about. They are going to assist with clinical record requests and if they receive a completed signed request form, they need to get the documents to Janet same day. And then they're going to send out the discharge and transfer reports. So they're the episode summary reports. At discharge, it needs to be sent within 5 days. At transfer, it needs to be sent within 2 days, excuse me, or of the known date of the transfer episode summary report will be sent within 2 days of the transfer or the known transfer date. Well, that is the information provided in Part 3 of 4 of the conditions of participation countdown. They'll be here soon. So if anybody does have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to management. You can reach out to myself, Andrea Callahan, or Susie Oliver. Thank you for your time and have a great day.